ever stop to think about what really goes on inside those huge tech companies? You know, the ones that shape so much of our daily lives. We see the polished outside, but what about the messy bits, the unexpected power plays, the real challenges happening behind the closed doors?
Exactly. And that's pretty much where we're headed today. Think of this as your peek behind the curtain at Facebook, specifically during a really critical time, rapid growth, huge global expansion.
Right. For this deep dive, we focused on a really fascinating account from Sarah Wynne Williams. She worked in Facebook's global public policy team from, 2011 to 2017?
That's the time frame, yeah.
Yeah.
So we're using her experiences, drawing from her book, to really get a feel for the internal atmosphere, the kinds of decisions being made, the culture.
We've synthesized the key points from her story, everything from that initial sort of optimism.
Right, the early mission-driven feeling.
All the way through to the growing ethical tangles and the unique internal dynamics that really shaped where the company went. So, our mission for you today is to get past the headlines, basically, to give you a clear but also nuanced picture of those crucial years. We're looking for those surprising facts, those insights that might just change how you see things.
Okay, let's do it. So Wynne Williams starts in 2011. And you mentioned this epiphany she had about Facebook's potential.
Yeah, it sounds like it was a real light bulb moment for her.
It does. She describes seeing its massive global reach. And interestingly, she compared it, and this is someone who'd worked at the UN, she compared it to the effort needed to regulate GMOs globally.
Wow, that's a heavy comparison early on, too.
It really is. It shows she saw the scale, the potential societal impact right from the get-go, even before it became, quite so obvious to everyone.
And getting the job wasn't straightforward, was it? She had to push for it. Why do you think she was so set on joining?
Well, her account suggests she genuinely bought into the mission back then, connecting the world. It sounds like a real belief. And even though her first attempts didn't land her a specific policy job immediately,
she kept at it.
Yeah, she persisted, which suggests that conviction was strong. And it's telling that when she did get the offer manager of global public policy, even her hiring manager, Martin Levine, wasn't totally sure what the role exactly entailed.
That's amazing. Such a critical area, but still undefined. And then she gets to the D.C. office, and it wasn't exactly the plush tech campus image.
Not at all. Not in 2011 D.C. She describes it as utilitarian.
Yeah.
Exposed pipes, concrete floors, even fake graffiti.
Fake graffiti.
Yeah. A real contrast to the fancy lobbies of the other firms in their building. It feels like it was maybe a conscious choice, trying to project this image of being different, maybe more raw, less corporate.
A statement, maybe, especially in D.C. And it sounds like they were really just inventing the global policy playbook as they went. Her first big task involved the New Zealand Prime Minister. What does that signal?
It just highlights how new it all was.
Yeah.
There was no playbook for dealing with foreign leaders. She had to put together that first briefing for Sheryl Sandberg completely from scratch. And what's really revealing is the immediate clash she saw. You had the standard government expectations, meet with the policy people, versus Facebook internal way of doing things.
Which way?
Which seemed to be more about who was connected to the top brass, like who were friends of Sheryl.
Yeah.
It showed a totally different power structure, a different set of rules almost.
Definitely different operating system. And through that, she got her first real exposure to key figures like Sandberg. What was the initial take on her?
Wynne Williams describes Sandberg as having this, incredible charisma, almost transformative. She could apparently switch from being very focused, very businesslike, to radiating this sort of celebrity charm.
Interesting. Adaptable.
Very. It suggests a leader who really knew how to use both authority and personal appeal, depending on who she was talking to.
And what about Martin Levine and Debbie Frost? They stood out too.
Oh, yeah. Levine comes across as super intense, laser-focused on details. Wynne Williams calls her a human metal detector.
Huh. Okay, thorough then.
Extremely thorough, it sounds like. Debbie Frost, on the other hand, seemed more direct, maybe a bit cynical, but importantly, she was one of the very few senior leaders back then with an international background. That lack of global experience at the top is maybe something to keep in mind.
Yeah, good point. It paints a picture of a really high pressure, maybe slightly chaotic environment. And the culture itself. What were the key traits early on?
Well, long hours were definitely a big part of it. A huge emphasis on productivity, on personal sacrifice for the job.
The hustle culture.
Pretty much. It felt like putting in crazy hours wasn't just expected. It was kind of badge of honor, valued, even celebrated.
But despite that intensity, there was still this feeling of purpose, like they were building something important.
Oh, absolutely. Initially, the vibe seems to have been really positive overall. You had that sense of mission, connecting the world, the excitement of being around really smart, driven people. And they were doing groundbreaking stuff then, like developing the first community guidelines, the early transparency reports. That was new territory for the internet.
Okay, so fast forward a bit. 2012, maybe 2013. Facebook hits this massive milestone, 1 billion users. Huge news. But internally, when Williams suggests the reaction wasn't just popping champagne corks.
Right, it's really striking. Externally, it's this huge celebration. Internally, especially at the leadership level, the focus immediately snapped to, okay, how do we keep this going? How do we accelerate?
So 1 billion wasn't the peak, it was just a stepping stone.
Exactly. It was like the pressure was on to find the next billion, and fast. There was already this anxiety about growth potentially slowing down. That relentless drive for more seems absolutely fundamental.
And that drove the push into, well, everywhere, including really difficult markets like Myanmar back then. What was that like?
She describes it as surreal, meeting government officials in a place with barely any internet infrastructure.
Yeah.
It really underlined the scale of the challenge. And critically, there was a big gap in understanding the local situation.
Like the languages,
Yeah.
the politics.
All of it. They were moving so fast into these complex places, but maybe without the deep local knowledge needed. And, well, we saw later how that could play out.
Yeah. And it wasn't just new markets. Dealing with established world leaders also showed some, let's say, unconventional approaches. What examples stick out?
Well, the contrast between how Zuckerberg and Sandberg handled visits from prime ministers is pretty telling. You had Zuckerberg apparently not wanting to meet the New Zealand PM.
Really?
That's the account. Compared to Sandberg, who seemed very focused on getting a photo op with the Japanese PM holding her book, Lean In.
Okay. Different priorities, clearly.
It suggests different ways of seeing Facebook's role, maybe. Different ideas about how to engage with traditional power structures. Did they see themselves as operating on a completely different level already? It raises questions.
And that anecdote about the office decor when the German delegation visited, the posters saying, think wrong, move fast and break things. How do you think that went down?
You can imagine, right? Especially with the German delegation, likely more focused on stability and not breaking things. That Silicon Valley mantra, which is all about disruption, well, it could easily sound alarming, maybe even reckless, in a different cultural context.
A potential culture clash.
Definitely suggests a possible blind spot, maybe a lack of sensitivity to how those messages might land elsewhere. And apparently, Martin Levine's awkward comment afterwards didn't help smooth things over.
Right. You really get this feeling of an internal world, almost a bubble forming. And the talk about money inside the company is also revealing price-insensitive employees. Economic volunteers.
Yeah, that points to a real divide. For a lot of the early folks with valuable stock options, money wasn't really a concern anymore. They were price insensitive.
Meaning they'd spend whatever on things.
Or just that their financial calculus was totally different from someone like Wynne Williams, who was on a regular salary. This created, potentially different clutches within the company, different views on risk, maybe even different motivations.
That makes sense. So as Facebook gets bigger, more influential, the ethical stuff seems to loom larger. And the lines between company business and personal benefits started to get fuzzy.
That's certainly how Wynne Williams portrays it. She gives examples where it felt like Facebook resources, even staff time, were being used to help Sheryl Sandberg personally. Things like getting help with visas for her nannies, or the big internal push to promote Lean In.
Which raises questions, obviously.
Big questions about using company assets and whether personal brand building started to overshadow, core company work sometimes.
And the organ donation feature that seemed to really crystallize a difference in perspective between Wynne Williams and Sandberg.
It really did. Wynne Williams seemed focused on the complexities, the legal hurdles, the ethical sensitivities around health data, the public policy angle.
Right, the potential pitfalls.
Exactly. Whereas she perceives Sandberg's main interest as being more about the data collection possibilities, the potential market opportunities it represented.
So policy versus growth or data?
It illustrates that potential tension.
Yeah.
A clash between thinking about responsible rollout and potential harms versus seeing it primarily through a lens of data, engagement, and market expansion. That kind of difference in fundamental approach can cause real friction as a company scales.
And the whole megaphone debate. Zuckerberg seeing Facebook as neutral, Sandberg maybe wanting to use its influence more actively. That's still a huge debate today, isn't it?
Absolutely central. Zuckerberg's view, as described, was basically We're just the pipes. We let people talk. We don't take sides. We don't censor much beyond the basics.
A platform argument.
Right. Whereas Sandberg seemed more willing, maybe even eager, to use Facebook's massive reach to actively promote certain causes or messages. Is it a neutral town square, or is it a powerful publisher with a voice? That disagreement cuts to the core of what these platforms are.
And fueling a lot of this was the growth team mentality you mentioned, prioritizing more above almost anything else. What did that lead to?
It seems it created this intense internal pressure where growth tactics became paramount. Sometimes, maybe, even if it meant pushing boundaries or overlooking existing rules.
Like bending the rules for growth.
That's the implication. You had people like Javi Olivan brought in, really focused on growth hacks and metrics. And Wynne Williams notes instances where Zuckerberg seemed almost naive about how people were actually using platforms, like not realizing teens might use Snapchat for sexting. It highlights this relentless focus on expansion, perhaps sometimes without fully grasping all the implications.
Then China comes into the picture. Huge potential market, but huge ethical hurdles with censorship demands. How do they navigate that internally?
Well, it presented a massive dilemma. Accessing China meant compromising on core principles around free expression that Facebook claimed to champion. The internal debate would have been intense. How much do you bend on censorship to get access to potentially billions of users? It's a tension many tech companies still wrestle with.
And then there was Internet.org, which became Free Basics, aimed at getting more people online, but stirred up a big controversy about net neutrality. Can you break down that core issue?
Sure. The idea was to offer a limited set of websites and services, including Facebook, of course, for free to people in developing countries. Zero rating, it's called. Sounds good, right? More access.
Seems positive on the surface.
But the criticism, the net neutrality concern, was that by making only certain services free, Facebook was effectively picking winners and losers online. It creates a walled garden, potentially limiting users' exposure to the full open internet and giving Facebook and its partners an unfair advantage. Is it really internet access if you only get a tiny curated slice of it?
Like getting free cable, but only channels owned by the cable company.
That's a decent analogy, yeah.
Right.
It potentially distorts the market and limits user choice in the name of providing some access.
And Zuckerberg himself was really pushing this hard, even meeting with heads of state in Panama. There was that policy badass moment.
He was definitely hands-on, personally lobbying for it. That Panama agreement sounded like a win, securing a deal on the spot. A policy badass moment, as she called it.
It wasn't all smooth sailing. Getting endorsements was tough.
Right. Despite that win, getting broader buy-in proved difficult.
Yeah.
Wynne Williams mentions Brazil's President Rousseff, for example, really questioning the model, asking if it truly helped local internet development or just entrenched Facebook. So there was significant pushback and skepticism globally, despite the high-level push.
It feels like around this time, maybe Zuckerberg's own view of Facebook's power was shifting, seeing it less as just a company and more as something else, a global force.
Her account does suggest a growing awareness on his part of just how influential Facebook had become. Maybe a shift towards seeing the platform almost like a supranational entity operating on the world stage in a way that transcended traditional business or even national boundaries. This evolving self-perception would definitely shape how they approach things going forward.
Okay, let's move into the later period, 2016-2017. Things seem to get even more intense, and you sense Wynne Williams becoming more disillusioned. Myanmar is a really harrowing example. What happened there?
It's just tragic. Myanmar really showed the dark side of Facebook being essentially the internet for millions. Hate speech, dangerous misinformation spread like wildfire on the platform.
And it had real-world consequences.
The devastating ones, contributing to horrific violence, ethnic cleansing, and the company's response was slow, tragically slow, partly because they didn't have enough people who understood the languages, didn't grasp the nuances of the local conflict, didn't prioritize fixing technical issues like Unicode compatibility that hindered moderation. It's a stark example of the immense responsibility that comes with that kind of reach and the consequences of not meeting it.
And it wasn't just Myanmar. Dealing with governments like Russia asking for content to be taken down, that created internal friction too, didn't it? Balancing free speech versus following local laws.
Definitely. You'd have different camps inside. Some would be pushing back hard against censorship, prioritizing free expression principles. Others might be more pragmatic, focused on staying in the market, complying with demands to avoid getting kicked out.
And leadership styles probably played into that.
Sure. Wynne Williams contrasts Martin Levine's approach with Joel Kaplan's, who came in later. Kaplan had a strong U.S. government background, maybe more focused on navigating power politics, relying on State Department connections, different backgrounds, likely different instincts on how to handle these thorny global issues.
Then comes the 2016 U.S. election, a huge moment. Internally, how is Facebook grappling with its potential role? Zuckerberg seemed defensive at first.
Yeah, the initial reaction seemed to be denial or at least downplaying any significant influence on the outcome. Crazy idea, he called it initially.
Which that changed.
According to Wynne Williams, yes. She describes Zuckerberg being angry after the election and a growing, maybe reluctant realization of the platform's actual power and how it could be misused. There were even whispers, she notes, about him considering his own political future, which suggests a real shift in understanding the intersection of tech, power, and politics.
And this idea of an enemies list, considering aggressive moves against critics of free basics, that sounds like a company getting defensive, maybe even hostile.
It suggests a culture potentially becoming more insular, more combative, where criticism isn't seen as feedback, but as an attack to be countered. Viewing critics as enemies is a significant shift and points towards maybe less openness, more of a siege mentality creeping in.
The Free Basics campaign in India really seemed to exemplify that win-at-all-costs approach, didn't it? Misleading pop-ups, trying to game the public consultation.
That campaign was incredibly aggressive, using tactics that many saw as deceptive, like pop-ups that made it seem like supporting Free Basics was supporting digital equality, or flooding the official consultation with template emails. It really damaged their reputation there and raised serious ethical questions about manipulating public discourse to achieve a corporate goal.
And for Wynne Williams personally, it sounds like things got increasingly difficult. Those blurred lines between professional and personal, like Sandberg's requests.
Yeah, she recounts some really uncomfortable situations, like being asked to share a bed on a private jet.
Yeah.
Things that cross professional boundaries, especially given the power dynamics involved.
That sounds incredibly awkward at best.
It contributes to an environment that can feel exploitative or disrespectful, eroding trust and professionalism.
And unfortunately, she also describes experiencing sexism and harassment and feeling like leadership didn't take it seriously enough. What does that reveal?
It points to a potential gap, maybe a chasm, between the company's stated values, often very positive and inclusive, and the day-to-day reality for some employees, particularly women, it seems, in her account. If issues like harassment aren't addressed effectively, it really undermines any claims about culture.
So it feels like all these things culminated in her decision to leave. The ethical compromises, the culture, the personal experiences. It led to disillusionment.
It seems like a convergence of factors,
Right.
watching the gap widen between the original mission she believed in and the actual practices she was seeing. The relentless focus on growth, sometimes overriding ethical concerns, the challenging and at times toxic aspects of the internal environment, it all built up, leading to that final decision that she could no longer be part of it.
So wrapping this up, we've covered a lot. This incredible growth spurt, Facebook becoming this global behemoth, the really thorny ethical and political challenges that came with it, the unique, often intense internal culture, and Wynne Williams's personal journey through all of that. What are the biggest takeaways for you?
For me, a few things really stand out. First, just how much internal conflict there often was over fundamental issues, the neutral platform debate, growth versus ethics. It wasn't monolithic. Second, the undeniable direct impact, sometimes unintentional, sometimes not, the decisions made inside Facebook had on major world events.
For better and for worse.
Absolutely. And third, the very real personal toll it could take, working in that kind of high-pressure, high-stakes, ethically complex environment. Those are the aha moments for me from her account.
And for you, the listener, thinking about this, it really makes you consider the huge responsibilities these massive tech platforms carry. It brings up urgent questions about regulation. Can global rules even keep up with this pace of change? And it underscores how important individual conscience, individual ethics still are, even inside these giant machines.
Definitely. And maybe the final thought to leave you with is this. Considering the immense power Facebook gathered during just those few years, what are the lasting effects we're still dealing with today? On democracy, on human rights, on how societies function globally. And looking forward, what are the really critical questions we absolutely need to be asking now about governing social media before things evolve even further?